Heartless Millionaire mocked an auction horse with slap. The horse's response left everyone stunned. The sun hung low over the plains, blazing down with a punishing heat that turned the auction yard into a cauldron of dust and sweat. Wooden rails creaked under the weight of men leaning against them, hats tugged low, eyes narrowed against the glare. Horses shifted in their pens, restless, their hooves striking the dry earth with dull thuds that carried to the murmuring crowd. It was the same every season. Families bringing their stock, small ranchers hoping for bargains, traders looking to profit off another man's misfortune. But today, something in the air felt sharper, as though the prairie itself held its breath. Near the edge of the corral stood a Mustang that did not blend with the rest. His coat bore the evidence of cruelty, raw scars crossing his flank, patches of missing hair where ropes had bitten deep, ribs faintly ridged beneath his hide. Yet despite the hardship written across his body, his bearing was unbowed. His head was high, his gaze fierce, his eyes flashing with the defiance of storm trapped in flesh. He seemed carved out of wind and grit, a creature that survived against odds most men could never imagine. The auctioneer's voice cut through the dust-heavy air. Wild, unbroken, dangerous, worthless to any but the reckless. His words dripped with disdain, his gavel raised high for emphasis. Laughter rippled from the crowd. No man wanted trouble tied to a rope, not when feed was scarce and winters were long. And yet, from the back of the crowd, a man named Elias watched with stillness that seemed out of place. He was broad-shouldered but lean, his face sun-weathered and drawn with lines of hardship. His shirt was faded, his boots worn thin, but his eyes, dark, steady, and tired, held something deeper. He had known loss, had carried grief until it had become part of his posture. His wife had been claimed by fever 2 winters ago, leaving him with nothing but a failing shack, debts heavier than cattle, and a red bandana she once tied around his wrist before their last ride together. He wore it still, not as ornament, but as memory. When Elias's gaze met the Mustang's, something inside him shifted. It was as though the beast had looked straight through him, stripping him bare, seeing not the ragged man he had become but the storm that still raged beneath his ribs. Scar recognized Scar. Spirit recognized spirit. The murmurs of the crowd hushed suddenly, drawn by the creak of a carriage pulling into the yard. Its black wheels cut harsh lines into the dirt, pulled by gleaming horses dressed in silver-trimmed tack. Atop the polished seat sat Langford, the millionaire whose name hung over the plains like a shadow. Langford was tall and sharply dressed, his suit too fine for the dust, his boots gleaming with polish, his hat angled just so. His eyes were cold, pale, and sharp as glass. Every movement he made carried the smug weight of a man convinced of his own superiority. He stepped down slowly, brushing dust from his sleeve with a gloved hand, as though the very air here was beneath him. A ripple of unease swept through the crowd. Langford's reputation had preceded him. He was a man who bought not for need, but for spectacle. He had humiliated ranchers with bids they could never match, mocked families who had come desperate to sell, and worse still, he delighted in cruelty toward the very animals he purchased. He was known to abandon horses once they no longer amused him, discarding life as though it were a coin to be tossed away. He strode toward the auction block, his smile curdling into a sneer as his gaze fell on the scarred Mustang. "I'll have that one," he said, his voice carrying easily across the yard. With a casual flick of his wrist, he tossed a pouch of gold coins onto the wood, the sound of metal clinking like a cruel drumbeat. The auctioneer's eyes widened. No poor rancher could compete. The gavel came down. Sold to Mr. Langford. The Mustang was dragged forward by rough hands. He resisted, muscles straining, hooves striking sparks against stone, but the ropes held. Langford approached with a slow, mocking smile. "A broken beast worth nothing," he declared loudly, ensuring all could hear. "But even nothing has its uses for entertainment." Then, in a gesture so sudden it silenced the yard, he lifted his gloved hand and slapped the horse hard across the muzzle. The crack echoed like a gunshot. Gasps erupted. A woman cried out. Children pressed against their mother's skirts. Elias felt heat surge through his chest, his fists curling so tight his nails dug into his palms. The Mustang staggered back, eyes blazing, nostrils flaring wide. And then came the sound, raw, fierce, unbridled. The horse screamed, rearing high into the light, hooves striking against the air, dust swirling like storm clouds around him. The ground trembled when he crashed back down, his eyes locked on the man who had dared strike him. Langford stumbled backward, his arrogance cracking, his polished boots slipping in the dust. For the first time, the sneer faltered. The crowd surged away from the fence, fear and awe mingling in their faces. But the Mustang did not lash out blindly. He stood tall, trembling with fury, but grounded, glaring with the fire of the plains itself. His very posture declared, "You will not break me." In that moment, Elias knew. He knew the horse's cry was his own, the defiance of spirit battered but not extinguished. Without thought, without permission, he stepped forward. The crowd parted instinctively, whispers crackling like sparks. His boots pressed into the dust, steady despite the pounding of his heart. He could almost hear his wife's voice, soft, steady. They carry the storms of the plains inside them. To meet their eyes is to see yourself. He stopped a few paces away, raising his hand slowly, palms open, no threat. The Mustang's ears flicked, muscles taut as bowstrings. The red bandana hung at Elias's wrist, swaying faintly in the breeze. Langford sneered, his voice dripping contempt. "Go on, beggar. Touch it. Let it tear you apart." But Elias did not falter. His eyes never left the horse's. Breath by breath, he closed the distance. He reached the rope. He waited. He did not seize, did not command. He simply stood, present, steady. And then the miracle happened. The Mustang lowered its head. Gasps swept the crowd. Men muttered disbelief. Children peered wide-eyed between their fingers. For in that lowering of the head was not submission, but choice, recognition. The auctioneer, always keen for drama, called out, "If he can ride it, let him keep it." The crowd erupted with cheers and laughter. Some jeered, eager for spectacle. Langford's voice rang out bitterly. "Ride it? He'll be thrown before his backside touches the beast." Elias tightened the red bandana around his wrist. He took one long breath, then, with a motion born not of arrogance but resolve, swung himself onto the Mustang's back. The yard exploded. The horse lunged, hooves tearing up dirt, bolting into a wild frenzy. Dust rose like storm clouds. Screams burst from the crowd. Elias clung with every ounce of strength, his body whipped with each violent twist. The Mustang reared, bucked, spun, but the man did not fall. Each second was a war, Will. Each breath a test of endurance. The crowd roared with every surge, torn between terror and awe. Langford's sneer faltered into disbelief, then rage. Slowly, impossibly, the frenzy slowed. The Mustang's gallop eased to a pounding run, then to a hard canter, then at last to a trembling trot. Elias leaned low, whispering through ragged breath, "We'll carry each other now." The horse stilled. The silence that followed was more deafening than the storm had been. Then the crowd erupted into cheers, hats flung into the air, voices echoing across the yard. Langford's face twisted. He demanded the horse back, but the auctioneer raised a hand. The crowd saw. The law saw. The beast chose his rider. The man keeps him. The millionaire's fury burned crimson in his cheeks. He turned on his heel, storming back to his carriage amid jeers that once would have silenced the yard. Power had slipped from his grasp, shattered by a horse's defiance and a poor man's steady hand. When the dust settled, Elias dismounted slowly, legs shaking, lungs heaving. He stroked the Mustang's scarred neck, feeling the thunder of life beneath the hide. "Ashen," he whispered, giving it a name born of both ruin and endurance. The horse flicked its ears, as if in acceptance. That night, beyond the edge of town, Elias built a small fire. The flames painted the Mustang's coat in shifting shades of gold and shadow. He sat with a red bandana in his hand, the memory of his wife a weight both heavy and steady in his chest. "We're not alone anymore," he whispered. "We'll heal, you and I. No man will raise a hand against you again." The Mustang shifted closer, its head bowing near the man who had stood for it. In that simple gesture was a covenant, silent, unbreakable. Beneath the sweep of stars, where the prairie stretched infinite, two broken lives had found one another, and the story of a cruel man's slap turned into something else entirely. A lesson, a reminder That dignity lives where kindness dares to reach. That strength is not in domination, but in compassion. The crowd would tell for years, the day a millionaire mocked, the day a horse defied, the day a poor man proved that scars can become bonds. And as dawn touched the horizon, Elias pressed his hand against Ashen's scarred neck, a single truth steady in his chest. Kindness is the only hand worth raising. And so it was what began with cruelty ended with kindness. A man and a horse, both scarred, both surviving, walked on together. If this story reached you, remember, sometimes the gentlest hands build the strongest bonds. Subscribe for more stories of hope and second chances.